Chapter 19, 74 Days After. The thing about being in a band, for me at least, is that the words to songs disappear altogether and you actually stop hearing the music when you play. On a good night, the best kind of night, it's not the sound that drives the music. It's the racing, the beat and thump behind your eyes, running through your arms, throbbing in your legs, even in your bare feet on the pedals. It's the way the chords build before they drop into the chorus in a 1-2 hit, the curved thump of the bass note, the rush and pulse of the most important line of lyrics. When you're a musician, you don't really listen to the music with your ears. You sense it all over. It's touch. It's not really sound at all. The room buzzed when we started, the audience settling in and warming up. They swayed at first, heads nodding and muscles unwinding as they found our rhythm. Left, left, right, right, drill the snare. I caught Isaac's eyes during the second or third song and thought of that ferry ride, his skin under my fingertips. Left, left, right, right, tap the cymbals. I watched Beckett and Jay standing by the front speaker, swigging from blue solo cups and playing PDA, but I shifted my mind away from them. Left, left, right, right, push the tempo. Someone turned the lights down, and I closed my eyes, sensing the pulse of the crowd, our sound building faster, louder, cleaner, and crisper. When I looked again, the audience was dancing with fists pumping in the air, with the surge of adrenaline and the frenzied vibe of everyone in the room feeling and doing the same thing. I could feel the drums in my gut, the snap of stick against skin, and our sound came crashing over them. I'm not going to lie. We botched a handful of rhythms during the first set and obliterated the sixth song when Maddie lost track of the lyrics and turned to me halfway in with that desperate, end it as soon as you can look. But we never stopped playing, a huge accomplishment, since in practice you can stop and start over whenever you want. And when we finished the last song before our set break, the crowd went nuts, like rip-roaring, whistle-blowing wild. We're going to take a break, Maddie purred into the mic as she shifted her weight onto one hip and popped her left motorcycle boot out in front of her. Come on now, she said when they booed. Keep your shirts on. We'll be right back. The set break began with an explosion of "that was amazings" as me and the rest of Nothing Right huddled around, high-fiving and half-hugging, attempting to play it cool but too amped to be nonchalant. We rehashed all the good stuff, like when Hudson dropped a beer bottle on the tile floor in the kitchen during Body in My Basement, and the crowd started shouting like it was the Super Bowl. Or when my drumstick flew out of my hand during Finding Wild Acres because my dad had been right. They fly out of your hand all the time when you're sweating during a gig. And Katie McRae picked it up and raised it into the air just as Jose Lopate lifted her onto his shoulders, chicken fight style. What about Maureen Green? Isaac said when he was next to me. Did you see her dress fall down? He asked, and then quickly, as he winked at me, not that I was looking. We had seen it. Everyone had seen the strapless dress drooping as she bounced and jumped and gyrated, and then finally and inevitably it had slipped down her chest, flashing anyone who was looking. Maureen Green, the girl with the high-pitched voice who was gossiping in the restroom as I sat in the stall and listened to her say, I bet he's no more missing than he wants to be. Beckett made his way to the group of us, his breath hot and boozy as he told us what rock stars we were and how great we sounded. Just like I knew you would, he slurred. Someone put on the Ramones, and the crowd drifted on stage to talk to us, while others wandered onto the balcony or toward the food table to munch. Their voices were hoarse, and their eyes were bloodshot, sweat-slicked hair and smeared mascara, but they couldn't stop talking about how great the show was. Our show. Half an hour, Maddie said, and Rabbit and I nodded. Then the two of them headed to the dining room to check out the table of snacks. Someone had told us there would be bacon-wrapped dates. Someone had said there were sliders and mini cheesesteaks. You hungry? Isaac asked me, but I shook my head. So I can steal you for a few minutes? I want to show you around the house, he said. Then his hand was in my hand, and that electric wave pulsing between us. I couldn't find any words, so I just nodded. We shouldered through the crowd to the upstairs, where the noise of the party shifted into a blur of voices punctuated by bursts of laughter. He showed me his father's study first, a massive office space facing the water, and we stood next to each other behind the gigantic oak desk and in front of the wall of windows, pressing our foreheads and fingertips against the cool glass. I thought of my dad first, wondering if he was down there somewhere. Maybe he'd spent the day wandering the marina neighborhood below us, or maybe he'd walked the beach looking out at the bridge. Look, Isaac said and pointed. Alcatraz, right there. You think if there were still prisoners there that they'd see us from the courtyard? I asked. During yard time when they got their 10 minutes of day outside? The lucky ones could see you, he said. It didn't seem that far away, the small island anchored out there in the bay. The sky was shadowed in dark pinks and grays by then, and the bridge looked more amazing than I'd ever seen it look before. Sometimes I forget, I said, that not everyone gets to see this all the time. As much as I resented the fact that San Francisco was the city that took my father away, I also knew there were a million people out there who would have loved to wake up here every day like I got to. Isaac was nodding. That's why I let myself be a tourist at least once every summer, he said, to remind myself. I feel that way about Paris when I'm there too. It's like with school and work and everything, I forget to see it sometimes, to actually see the city. We're spoiled, I said. Everyone is kind of, in one way or another. I think that's how it is everywhere. Like no matter where you live, it becomes normal. And no matter how normal it is to you, it's new and amazing to someone else. I remembered visiting Chicago as a kid, staying with my grandmother in Berwyn, but going to the city to see the Navy Pier or Millennium Park. Granny and I would take the day, just the two of us, and we'd spend the afternoon at Lincoln Park Zoo. Somehow, the buildings in Chicago seemed bigger and more mysterious than ours, the stores filled with more interesting things. We'd catch a game at Wrigley Field, and even though my dad had taken me to the Giants lots of times by then, seeing the Cubs was more exciting. I couldn't believe that he'd actually gotten to grow up in Chicago. But standing there with Isaac, looking out at the Pacific and the bridge stretching toward the redwoods, I figured lots of kids who visited my city couldn't believe there were people like me who got to grow up here, too. Next to me, Isaac slid his hands back into mine and tugged me toward the door. Onward, he said. By the time we made it to his bedroom, my heart had finally slowed down from the gig, but had sped up all over again when I realized where he was taking me. He opened the door and moved out of the way so I could go in first. Voila, he said, mi casa es su casa. He'd strung Christmas lights from the ceiling, tons of them, the only lights on in the room. And when he followed me in, he loosened his tie and lit a stick of incense that was sitting on his nightstand. There was a desk with photos and concert ticket stubs tacked on a bulletin board above it, and the walls were covered in movie posters and a huge world map. But it was the books I couldn't stop looking at, books everywhere, stacked into a makeshift table and piled on his dresser, where most kids would have had a TV or leftover dishes from late night snacks. There were heaps of them crawling up the walls by his bed, by the doorway, by the reading chair, where the pile was tall enough to reach the bottom of his Beatles poster, which was hung next to the floor lamp. Like most bedrooms, I guess, he said. Right, I said, except for the fact that your bedroom is actually a library. He laughed. Except for that. He sat on the bed, and I sat next to him, nervous a little, but knowing that there was nowhere else I'd rather be. Bookworm, he said, and shrugged. Now you know my secret. I picked through a stack on his nightstand, extremely loud and incredibly close. White Teeth, Slaughterhouse-Five, The Hotel New Hampshire, The Perks of Being a Wallflower. I got really into it after we moved, he said. Reading, I mean. I guess I was lonely. I didn't know anyone in Paris when we got there, and when I came back here that first summer, it seemed like all my friends had found other friends. It's not like you can call someone up and ask him to meet you for lunch or go for a hike when you're in fifth grade. You're still just a kid, but you're too old for play dates, for your parents to make sure you have friends. He cracked his jaw. It was a tough few years. So I read. A lot. I realized that even though Isaac had always intrigued my friends and me, we'd never actually gotten in touch with him when he was in town. We never invited him to hang out with us, never included him when we went to parties or met up at Hippie Hill or Haight Street. We'd built him into some kind of alluring idea, an enigma, really, but we sort of forgot he was just an awkward kid like the rest of us. Don't get me wrong, the music stuff is important to me too, he said. I love my job helping a band prep for a show. There's nothing like it. And I suddenly pictured him a million miles away at the end of summer, setting up the stage for someone else, some random band in Paris, instead of my band in California. And I love watching you play, he said, his hand on my leg, tracing circles just below the hem of my dress. But it's not important to me the way it's important to you. Books are. They're what I like the most. Then he tilted his head and smiled. What I liked the most, until you, that is. I was smart enough to know that Isaac had probably shown a lot of girls his room before, had maybe even used the same line on them, until you. But it didn't really matter because being with him felt good. It felt easy and exciting at the same time, comfortable but different than being with any other boy. It just felt right. Slow hands and eyelashes on my cheek when he kissed my nose, my mouth, my neck. He lifted my hand, kissed the inside of my wrist, and bit at the guitar string bracelet, smiling with his eyes locked on mine before he moved back to my lips. His fingers gently tugging through the tangles in my hair and sending goosebumps down my spine, slow and cautious and sweet. Below us, someone dropped a glass or a bottle, and people whistled and cheered, but they all sounded so far away. My lips were on his cheek, the coarse stubble and smell of cedar, on his neck behind his ear to make him laugh, and finally his lips again, more serious by then. I was lit up, like his skin made my skin a million times more sensitive. His hands on my waist and my palms on his shoulders, pulling him closer. Our mouths quicker, lips wetter, as I leaned against him and we both fell back onto the bed, laughing a little, but not stopping. And then footsteps and voices in the hallway. I thought first of Philip Corey Thompson and all three of his names, the whole of him bursting through the door and catching us. But then the worry dropped away as I recognized the voice and rise and fall of the words. Callie, Callie. So I pulled away from Isaac and whispered, I'm sorry, before kissing him quickly again and calling out, I'm in here, Beck, here. Beckett was drunk. I knew it as soon as I saw him. He and Jay were bumping into each other as they stood in the doorway, and when Beck finally started talking, it sounded like his mouth was full of glue. Oh, man, he said. God, Cal, I'm sorry. Seeing us on the bed, breathing hard. I didn't know you two. It's okay, I said quickly. He kind of looked like a little kid, disheveled and disoriented, which was almost endearing. But then I moved my eyes to Jay. Jay with his stupid mohawk, in his tiny hipster t shirt, with his smug little smile as he leaned into Beck like he actually deserved to be hanging out with my best friend. So I said, Are you okay, Beck? And even though he nodded, I told him, No, you're not. You're wasted. How'd you get so drunk? He said, Jay brought the booze, snuck in a flask in his hoodie. Next to him, Jay was laughing. A flask? You mean a flask? He said to Beck, and I said, Classy. Way to get him slammed, Jay. But Beck was shaking his head. No, I'm fine, he said, swaying a little. Really, I just need thingamajigs, the whatsits. Jay laugh whispered something I couldn't hear, and then Beck took exaggerated care to straighten his bow tie. His jacket was who who knows where, and then slowly put his hands into his pockets and tried to stand up straight and serious, a last ditch effort to pull himself together. The keys, he said, a laugh high pitched and mashed up like a hiccup or a burp, I couldn't tell which. I need the keys for He slid his hand into Jay's hand. Jay, who still had said not one word to me since the bakery sidewalk sighting. The keys of the car. We need some time alone, Beck said definitively. You've got to be kidding me, I said. That's why he needed me? Because he wanted to hook up with his slimeball boyfriend? I looked at Jay, but Jay looked at the floor, and next to me, Isaac stood up. My dad's got all the keys, he told them. And I hate to say it, but I doubt he'd be willing to give them to you guys since you're shit-faced. But Beckett was shaking his head. That's where you come in, my friend. He pointed and wobbled his fingers at me. You're sober, right? There's no way I'm getting the keys from Isaac's dad so you and this loser can go make out in Rabbit's car, I told them, realizing as I said it that in Beckett's mind, there was no reason in the world I should be calling his boyfriend a loser. Beck said, Whoa! And I said, Sorry. And he said, That's pretty harsh, Cal. And Isaac asked me, Are you okay? Isaac being another person who had absolutely no idea that Jay was a complete fraud. I was counting back from 12, like always, and when I hit 0, I asked if I could talk to Beck alone. And then it was just me and him in Isaac's bedroom, which had, I swear, only 5 minutes earlier been the best place in the universe, but now suddenly felt toxic and claustrophobic. Beck stood next to the book table and stumbled with his words. Look, I'm sorry I interrupted your, but it's not like I'm asking, it's not like life or death. And then a little quicker. I mean, I really like him, Cal. Be nice if you made an effort. It was absolutely the worst time to do it, with him being drunk and the band probably wondering where I was so we could start our second set, with Jay and Isaac maybe standing right outside the door waiting for us, listening even, and Beck with a woozy, I might just need to puke look creeping across his face as he leaned on the book table, which wasn't really a table, just a pile of hardbacks, so that he almost fell over when it swayed. It was worse than the possible it was worse than the worst possible time, but I sat back down on the bed and said, "He's cheating on you, Beck. I saw him with another guy, kissing some boy in front of a bakery in my neighborhood, the one with the good macarons." And it was like once I started talking, I couldn't stop. So with my eyes on the floor, I kept going. And it wasn't even like he apologized. He saw me. I mean, when I saw him, he didn't even come clean. I kind of thought that if he told you first, then maybe it wasn't such a sleaze. But he didn't. He didn't tell you at all. He acted like everything was fine. And you seemed happy that I just couldn't be the one to say it. I tried at the beach. I swear I was going to tell you everything, but you just kept talking about how important it was to you and that how important it was to you that he and I got along. When, he asked, when did you see him? Last week. I figured he'd be angry. Angry at Jay, obviously, but maybe also a little angry at me for not telling him sooner. And then for telling him like that. I thought he'd get mad and then he'd probably ask for another cup of whatever it was he'd been slugging all night, concede the fact that his new boyfriend was, in fact, a total moron, and finally collapse next to me on the bed. I was ready to say all the right stuff. I wanted to tell him that Jay wasn't good enough for him and that Jay was too old and too trendy and that his jeans were skin tight and his t-shirts too small. That in a few weeks we'd laugh about the time Beck dated the guy who actually had a mohawk. We'd stop going to the cafe, the lattes were too expensive and the line was always long, and who needed Jay anyway? Beck would find someone a million times better in half a second once word got out that he was single again. And I figured it would take some convincing, but eventually he'd nod, he'd let me kiss him on the cheek, maybe we'd stay in the bedroom for a while longer, listening to the crowd downstairs. Then I figured he'd be okay. I did not figure he would turn his eyes to me and say, "You are a selfish brat, Colin Pace, and you're totally full of shit." What? You heard me. It's not true. You made it up because you've been jealous ever since Jay and I got together. Are you kidding me? Please tell me you're kidding me, I said. He was standing in front of me by then, looking down and spitting a little when he said, "What I'm trying to say is, I just mean this thing with me and Jay is real, and making up some lie isn't going to stop it." "It's real, huh?" I asked, standing then too, as real as him climbing all over some other guy's face in the middle of the street. "I saw it, Beck. I was there. Why would I make that up?" "Because your summer's been shit so far," he said, "because you haven't found your dad and you aren't allowed to apply to the school you really want to go to because you haven't had my unadvisable attention since I started dating Jay, and you need that. You like totally need that. You're angry for all kinds of good reasons, and I get it, Callie, but you can't do this. You can't take it out on me." "Undivided," I said. "Undivided attention, moron." "Whatever." "You're not even making sense," I said. "Look, I know you like him and this whole thing sucks, but that doesn't mean it's not true. Ask him, Beck, see what he says. You're just trying to break us up, so I'm miserable just like you are. So we're on an even playing field like always. So you can have me back as your sidekick, always on the call." "Why don't you dry out a little and then we can talk this over," I said. And he said, "Whatever." And then just before he stormed out of the room and slammed the door like a drama queen that he was, he called me a jealous asshat. The second set did not go well. Beckett and Jay were nowhere to be found, so even though I shouldn't have cared, I was pretty distracted. My head was pounding so bad by the time I sat down behind my drums, I wasn't even sure I'd be able to play. Rabbit suggested we begin with some covers, but we'd lost most of the crowd by then. Lots of kids had gone home or had gone to different parts of the house to make out or play cards or whatever. Isaac stood up front during the whole second set and pretended we were doing great, even though when one of Rabbit's strings broke and we had to finish Porno for Pyro's Pets without him, which sounded terrible. So we made it a quick set and called it a night, agreeing to pretend that the second half of the show never happened. You sure you're okay? Isaac asked for the third time once we'd finished playing and we were packing up the gear. I nodded yes, but said no. It's just this thing with Beckett, I said, knowing I was being short with him, but not knowing how to fix it. I was tired and hungry, 100% deflated. I called my mom around midnight from Isaac's landline. The gig was great, I lied. We were all really happy, and could I please spend the night at Maddie's since we were celebrating? In truth, I just couldn't imagine going home or having to answer her questions about the party. Or worse, her being already asleep and having to face a quiet house. We're leaving now, I told her. Rabbit's driving. Everything's fine, I said. I was asleep in the back seat, my head knocking against my snare drum by the time we pulled out of Isaac's neighborhood.